Hello world, welcome to the 56th Climate Change Emergency Awareness Protest here in Gettysburg, PA, USA. It is January 3rd, 2020. The 2020s has erupted on us, and it's a scary thing. That's what's going to be coming. Anyways, next week's rally will be the 57th, and it'll be on January 10th at 11 a.m. in Gettysburg, unless we go to Washington, D.C. to hang out with Jane Fonda again. So Australia continues to burn. You have people hiding in lakes to survive the fires. You have people that retreated to the beach in Victoria State in Australia. 4,000 of them were on the beach trying to avoid the fires until they burned out and all was safe. And I'm not sure it's still safe, but whatever. Eventually fires stop once everything burns down. 8,000 koala bears have been killed, they estimate. And this number is truly horrific beyond the 8,000 koala bears, which didn't stand a chance. Is also 500 million animals have perished. So that's 500 million animals they estimate have perished. So it's a huge number what's going on. It's a systemic collapse, environmental collapse of what's happening through fire. And it's a very scary situation. The question comes to be, though, beyond all that, is how is Australia going to continue to have food? If it's 107 degrees average, as it was one day for the entire continent, I don't see how food can grow. You're into a mega drought situation, obviously, of what's going on. And without rain, crops don't grow unless you can irrigate. And evidently, the water companies now are taking water out of the ground, water they can't afford to lose because the politicians have sold out to them. So any aquifer is going to be drained down to nothing. So Australia basically is going to become an extinct continent. The Aborigines will survive because they're smart, they know how to survive. White people do not know how to survive as long as there's, once the grocery stores go and it becomes a real issue. On a sidebar, you had many people escaping the fires, and the younger generation no longer carries cash. So they got to other regions of the country or the state, and they didn't have any cash with them. The ATMs are down. So what do you resort to? As I've been saying, you're 9 meals away from chaos. People broke into supermarkets, stole food, whatever to survive. You can't pump out gas out of the gasoline. You can't get gasoline if there's no electricity. So it becomes a whole issue. And, then what happens also is that the people from outside take the food from the people in certain regions, then those people have no food, so they have to leave. So it becomes a whole crush of people having to escape. And eventually you're going to end up with a Mad Max situation. And the USA needs to take heed of what's happening in Australia. We're slow to learn, slow to pay attention, slow to see what's going on. But this could easily come to the United States for specific regions. So it's a food insecurity issue. As long as trade keeps up, everything works perfectly fine within reason, and they can replenish your supplies. But eventually a trade situation will break down once a societal collapse happens, and people want to save their own butts rather than try to export food to other regions. So an odd thing going on with this climate change thing I've been noticing, and no one's talking about this, is that the southern hemisphere is taking this on the chin. And you would think they wouldn't, because New Zealand was a place to escape to in the southern regions, and they're okay because Antarctica's there and it'll keep things cool. However, what you're having is the island nations are undergoing severe flooding due to ocean rise. You have severe droughts, as I said, in Australia. You have southern Africa, which no one talks about. 1/3 of the bottom half of Africa is in a severe drought. It's termed a mega drought. You have Victoria Falls, which in Zimbabwe, I think it is, have almost totally dried up. It's a beautiful waterfalls, but now it's totally dried up. And then you also have Chile, the country of Chile, which is also in a mega drought from Santiago on down. The equatorial regions, which is the Central America, Pakistan, India, the Middle East, which also is experiencing severe heat. Central America, people are leaving that in droves because there's no they're into a drought situation, and again, they can't grow food. You can put on coats and turn on air conditioning as long as your electricity is working, but if you have no food, you got to leave the area. And that's what's going to happen by the millions, if not billions, of people eventually around the world, including the ever-present United States, which thinks we're insulated, and we're not. northern hemisphere experienced last spring and summer fires in the taiga region, which is basically a ring of trees all the way around from Canada, Alaska, over to Siberia and Scandinavia. They experienced mega fires there. And what it did is release massive amounts of carbon in the atmosphere, but it also released massive amounts of permafrost. It melted the permafrost, which released a massive amount of carbon dioxide as well as methane. And it's not a good situation, and those forests can't be replenished quickly because things don't grow quickly there. So you also had the affected areas of California, of course, and then we had, central USA experienced the flooding last spring, and the farmers weren't able to get in the fields at all if they did. And if they did, it was late. A lot of the farms are going under, the mom and pop operations, and they're selling out to corporate farms. And that'll work for a while until they totally deplete. Hold on. That'll work for a while until they totally deplete the soils there. And eventually you won't be able to put enough fertilizer down to keep up with everything. And that's our breadbasket and breadbasket of the world. And if that goes away, then basically we don't export food to other parts of the world, and the world starves, and then eventually the United States starves as well. So you have methane hydrates right now escaping out of Alaska, the North Slope of Alaska, and Siberia, which is very shallow seas. Hold on, I got a truck coming here, and I'll pause. So you have the methane hydrates escaping out of the ocean, which is methane going up into the atmosphere because of permafrost melt, as well as the methane hydrates that are trapped underneath the seabed in the very shallow seas, which is under 150 feet. And the scary part about methane is when it first comes out, it's 160 times more potent than is CO2, and then it goes down after 2 years down to 86 times more potent. And then after 20 years, it's about 20 times more potent for the next 100 years. So it's a severely catastrophic greenhouse gas. Presently, the CO2 level has been around 412 to 413 and a half, somewhere in there. But briefly, already this year, it's crossed the 415 barrier on December 31st, if you look at the charts. So we're well on the way to 420, 419 parts per million CO2 level, which means nothing to most people, but take this in mind. Humans have only been around when CO2 level has been below 280 parts per million. We're at 413 right now, 415, closing in on 420. So if you factor in the CO2, the methane levels as well as nitrous oxide, you're somewhere in the 650s, 680s, somewhere in there, carbon dioxide equivalency. What's happening, what that means is that we're closing in on the CO2 level of 40 million years ago, which was an extinction event due to asteroid and also the Deccan steppes erupting volcanic eruptions for several 100,000 years, which threw CO2 into the air. And as we know, that was a dinosaur ending event. The asteroid was a coup de grace that finished off everything there. And we had I think it was a 75% die-off of all life on Earth. But what's happening is we're accelerating right towards the PETM, Permian Mass Extinction barrier, which back then when the CO2 level was so high that 96% of all life died on Earth. So your upper level creatures such as humans and mammals and things won't survive. And it'll be down to single cell organisms again, and they have to start all over. So it's not the issue of everybody dies, blah, blah, blah. I hear that from family and friends and relatives, and you got to calm down and stuff like that. But everybody dies, yes. It's how you're going to die. I don't think starvation in a Mad Max situation and gun battles and people scrambling for food is the way you want to go out. Unless you take yourself out, it's going to be a horrible, horrible situation. So right now you got your politicians in charge, and I don't mean just Russia with Putin and India, the prime minister there, and China with their president, and Morrison in Australia, and Bolsonaro in Brazil. Our leaders in charge here right now, obviously Donald Trump is a sinister leader in that he's trying to kill us all with his policies, and he is mentally ill concerning climate change. I've said that over and over again. He denies it in spite of all the evidence. But it's also the Republican Party as well as the Democrat Party. They both have to take responsibility for what's going on and lack of action. if the Democrats were so concerned about climate change and they said it's a threat to humanity and all that, they would be spending every minute talking about it during their campaigns and not veering off onto any other issue. If it's a matter of survival and we're going to all die by 2026 or 2030, don't you think they would take action? If we're being attacked by an enemy and we're going to be overrun in 10 years, I think you would go at it really, really hard and do legislation and enact laws to thwart the idea that we're going to be dead because of climate change or carbon dioxide levels in the air. So your politicians are directly committing murder on you and your future generations. If you have a child, under age 40, that child will not live out what was, seen to be as a life expectancy cycle. If you have a child under 30, they're going to fall way short, and God forbid you have a child under 20 like we do or anything like that. And it's very scary as to what's going to happen to them. And this is not a possibility. This is what's coming down the road. The only way to get rid of this situation is to have a total political change and a systemic change in our society. And it sounds really radical to say that, and it will come down to that, though. The people will begin to realize that politicians have sold them down the creek for greed and corruption and money. So, the question is, do you want peaceful demonstrations like this and what Extinction Rebellion does and what Greta Thunberg does? Or do you want a violent revolution, which is going to happen eventually anyway, and people erupt and realize that they have no food and no future and no habitats to survive? Once your family starts dying, you kind of get a little pissed off. And that's what's coming, and people don't even realize there's a problem. Why? Because the media, who's in bed with the politicians and too chicken shit to talk about it, won't talk about what's happening and talk to the scientists, real scientists. Paul Beckwith, Peter Graves, I think, I can't remember his name. And then Peter Wadhams and Guy McPherson, Kevin Anderson, people like that. They really need to step up and get these scientists on their shows and tell what's really happening, as opposed to these mealy-mouthed people that pretend to be scientists and say we have 12 years to act on this, because we don't. So, there is a thing called too late. Basically, everyone's missed the train. They haven't even gotten out of bed yet, and the train already pulled away from the station. You haven't packed your bags, you haven't prepared, and you didn't even know there was a train that pulled away. So, you can sit around and not do anything and wait for the politicians to solve your issue. Right now it's January 3rd in the United States and the world, and our elections would be over next year, November, whatever. And then by January 20th, a new president or Donald Trump gets re-sworn in as president on January 20th, a year from now. Well, it takes another 6 months beyond that to do action. We don't have a year and a half to get on things. We're not going to survive this situation, and every minute we waste is now 30, 40, an hour, 2 hours that we lost. So people need to get on this. Politicians, those campaigning for office, need to quit giving it lip service and actually take it for the severe issue it is. The idea of talking about any side issues is absolutely pathetic and ridiculous at this time. And there's a co-conspirator in murder, okay? And I don't mean murder of you and me. I mean murder of your children and then your grandchildren. Forget it. You won't have grandchildren. If you haven't had the grandchildren, you're not going to have grandchildren because they won't be around or they won't survive them. So this is a hard talk, and we need to have more of these. Everyone needs to start talking this way. This is the 2020s, and I think by next summer, coming up in 6 months, 8 months, you're going to start seeing some horrific events, even more so than Australia's events. So I suggest everyone start getting out. I'm here by myself as usual. Tanya will be out in about another 20 minutes. And the weather's not good, but what's the alternative? I could stand on the street and do bad things and cause a whole ruckus, but a parade of one is still a parade of one. So you want to have a positive, peaceful demonstration and not a violent one, but I guarantee in 3 years to 6 years, the violence will erupt everywhere. And unless the politicians get on top of this and not think about how they're going to round people up, but rather come up with solutions. And that involves what Extinction Rebellion says, is to have a citizens' assembly not involving the politicians to come up with solutions and strong arm these politicians, or kick them, drag them out of office, and make them do these actions. So sitting around won't do it. Get to it. I suggest everyone wake up immediately, but as you can tell, nobody's here. I'll look around here. And what I'm going to wear today is a koala hat. It's a koala bear, and Tanya has this polar bear because koalas are going extinct. And here's a picture of it right now. So those guys are sweet little guys, and they don't deserve the fate they're getting, and the young humans don't deserve the fate they're being handed. So I'll see you next week. That'll be January 10th, probably 11 o'clock, unless we go down to Washington, D.C. Thanks for hanging in there. See you later.